As a result of those reactions, Lula's key allies in Brazil are very close to assembling a congressional majority to enshrine this judicial censorship regime into a congressionally enacted legal framework. Though the detailed provisions of the law have not yet been unveiled, its core powers have been disclosed, namely, any citizen, including journalists, who write or publish content containing ideas that the government and courts consider false, that they deem false, are subject not only to having their writings barred and removed and deleted by force of law, but those citizens who wrote the false ideas will face punishment, including fines under certain circumstances and even imprisonment. It is, in other words, yet another return to the dark times of the pre-Enlightenment era, before the 17th century, when many of the world's greatest and most innovative thinkers, Socrates, Copernicus, Galileo, Voltaire, Descartes, and so many others, were constantly persecuted, forced to write in virtual code to conceal their attacks on establishment pieties, and often imprisoned, all because of the claim that they defended ideas that were deemed false. And while all of those cases happened in different countries and centuries and thus contain important differences, there is one fundamental thread that connects them. Society was ruled by a centralized institution of authority, a monarch, a church, clerics, an emperor, which had convinced itself that it was no longer plagued by the human condition of fallibility, that instead it had managed to acquire and embrace absolute truth. Absolute truths, by their very nature, are permanent and universal. They are also, above all else, unchallengeable. Once an institution of power decrees that it has discovered the kind of truth which only deities are capable of acquiring, it becomes almost rational and certainly inevitable that they would use the force of law to prohibit debates about those beliefs. After all, what is the point of entertaining debates and allowing dissent and questioning they include of truth that's definitively and universally proven, that have the qualities of being divinely inspired and endorsed? The belief of such institutions is that debates and dissent over their views that have been decreed true are not merely futile. Why bother discussing whether 2 + 2 = 4? But such debates are outright dangerous and subversive. These absolute truths these authorities have acquired and bestowed on the world have gifted humans with stability and harmony and the comfort of knowing that falsity has been banished. And as a result, anyone wishing to question such treasures are obviously either malicious or destructive or both. And so there's no reason to allow such debates and no reason to permit those who attempt to disturb the comfort of absolute truth to remain free, at liberty to continue their threatening work that has the potential to incite mass discontent and even instability and violence. Once one adopts that classically tyrannical mentality, based more than anything in overwhelming hubris, namely the belief that a human being and their views are so self-evidently correct that nobody and nothing should be permitted to question them, then it is only a matter of time before all meaningful debates on the most important matters of the day become prohibited, simply by decreeing any deviations to be false or dangerous, or likely to usher in instability and dangerous attacks on the ruling class. Such utter repression is the clear, continuous, and seemingly inevitable outcome of every era and every country in which a regime is able to seize the power to decree truth and falsity, and then use the power of the law to ban what is deemed by them to be false. First in my Substack space, and now here on the show, we have spent the last several years warning with increasing fervor of the dangers of this rapidly escalating censorship regime in the West, one that is quickly migrating from the most despotic regimes of the world, where laws have been in place for years that allow the government to decree what is and is not fake news and disinformation, and then ban any dissent from it, and punish those who do dissent. Places like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Egypt, Singapore, and Turkey all have the kinds of anti-fake news and anti-disinformation law that Brazil is poised to implement. It's now migrating into the democratic world, including most of the West and now the United States, which is why they are cheering on Brazil's law and studying it and feting them in the capitals of Europe because they intend to use that model that Brazil is about to implement as a model to impose in the United States and in the rest of Europe. This weekend, we were able to report that story, and now the same weekend, we are presented with one of the most vivid and potent examples yet of how readily such laws will inevitably be abused, and of the grave dangers from allowing the government to proclaim the power to determine truth and falsity, and for allow these laws to continue to take hold. Now, as you certainly remember, ever since the pandemic began, with remarkable speed, but basically at the same time that we heard of what was called a novel coronavirus. Novel because it was unlike anything scientists had seen. It was of great complexity. They were going to have a great deal of time. They were going to need a great deal of time and have a great deal of difficulty, we were told, analyzing what this virus was, how to treat it. And nonetheless, somehow, within the very first week or two, Dr. Fauci created a universal consensus of scientists who had announced to the world that there was no debate possible about one component of this novel coronavirus, its origin. They were absolutely certain and made everyone who was able to hear have it known that the way in which the coronavirus was created and ended up being infecting humans was that it made a species leap from animals to humans, whether at a wet market in China or in some other way. That was the truth. They had discovered it and proven it with remarkable speed and absolute definitiveness to the point where nobody rational could even question that claim, developed in a heartbeat, let alone express dissent to it. And yet we learned this week from the Wall Street Journal, now almost 3 years into the pandemic, something quite remarkable. There you see the Wall Street Journal article and its headline on the screen, the title of which is "Lab Leak is the most likely origin of COVID-19 pandemic." Energy Department now says the U.S. agency's revised assessment is based on new intelligence. So, to be clear, the U.S. Department of Energy is not merely saying that we should remain open to the possibility that the way the coronavirus entered humanity was through a leak at the Wuhan lab. They're saying that their assessment is that that is the more likely explanation for how it happened and not the zoonotic leap from animals to humans. They're not saying they know for certain. There's a humility that they have that Dr. Fauci lacked in the first week of the pandemic, but they're saying it's possible that there's another explanation, but to them, the most likely one is the one that we were told for 2 years only lunatics believed, and that was so blatantly unhinged that it shouldn't even be allowed to be heard on the internet, and it wasn't allowed on the internet. That's how repressive the debate was as a result of what Dr. Fauci did in the very first week or two of the pandemic, with the very vigorous assist of the always uncurious corporate media. The Wall Street Journal article reports, quote, "The U.S. Energy Department has concluded that the COVID pandemic most likely arose from a laboratory leak, according to a classified intelligence report recently provided by the White House and key members of Congress. A new report highlights how different parts of the intelligence community have arrived at disparate judgments about the pandemic's origin. The Energy Department now joins the FBI in saying the virus likely spread via mishap at a Chinese laboratory. 4 other agencies, along with the National Intelligence Panel, still judge that it was likely the result of a natural transmission, and 2 are undecided. U.S. officials declined to give details on the fresh intelligence and analysis of the Energy Department to change its position. They added that while the Energy Department and the FBI each say an undetected lab leak is most likely, they arrived at those conclusions for different reasons. A senior U.S. intelligence official confirmed that the intelligence community had conducted the update, whose existence hasn't previously been reported. This official added that it was done in light of new intelligence, further study of academic literature, and consultation with experts outside the government. Now note here, that we cannot conclude, at least from this, that the US government has discovered the actual origin. All of this would lead a rational person to conclude that that is still very much debatable. No rational person would want to prevent a debate on this question from being conducted on the internet or anywhere else based on the argument that the answer has already been definitively ascertained. Everybody should want this debate to continue. Should want to know the answer, and clearly we don't, because experts who are tasked with studying the relevant data are reaching different conclusions. So the point here is not that when the US government opines on something, we all uncritically nod our heads and start repeating it. That's what the media does, and that's what the media did, as we're about to show you. That's what idiots and propagandists do. What rational people do is, before they believe that a definitive answer to one of the world's most important and pressing historical questions has been discovered, they want to see proof that it's true. And that was never provided, even though our major institutions, starting with the US government, followed by the corporate media, and then ultimately by big tech, all did just mindlessly nod their head soon as Dr. Fauci announced very early in the pandemic that he knew the answer, and not only knew the answer, but with such certainty that no dissent should be allowed. Now, just to remind you of how repressive the climate was as a result. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update. Catch our full shows for free, live weekdays at 7 p.m. Eastern on Rumble, and join our locals community at greenwald.locals.com for all of my written journalism, exclusive after-show Q&As, and more.